speaker is scheduled for Tuesday, and that's Mike McCord. He's a graduate of our program and has a master's from UT Knoxville, and he's TWRA's small game biologist. It's really a kind of a strange position. Well, he's small game fur bearers, and it used to be small game fur bearers, diseases, and pig, and maybe one other. And I think I'm not sure what all it is now, but he's small game and fur bearers. So he might talk about both small game and fur bearers, because he's not going to come twice. Fur bearers is our next and last topic. So be ready for him on Tuesday with good questions and such. Okay. All right. I'm not sure that I don't think I needed the whole time Tuesday, and I don't know that I'll need the entire time today either. Talking about small game management in general, some broad considerations. And I want to start with a couple things that I think most of you are already pretty familiar with, but just to catch everybody up. If we keep in mind that the federal government is responsible for migratory and endangered species aren't hunted. So when it comes to game species, the federal government is responsible for the stuff that migrates, right? So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has authority for snipe and woodcock, those are shorebirds, for mourning dove and the other columbiforms, for coots and moorhens and Virginia rails and soras, which are all water birds. And the last of those three, moorhens, soras, and rails, are what are sometimes called cryptic water birds. They often occur at low densities. They're often associated with emergent vegetation and wetlands. So you often don't see them in that vegetation. What the state is responsible for, well, yeah, I said the columbiformes, but why is the federal government not responsible for these two members of the columbiform
Non-native
family? Why?
Non-native.
That's right, because they're non-native, right? So the states have that authority. Bullfrog and all the mammals, which of course don't migrate. So does that mean that the state doesn't have anything to do with those migratory species? No, it doesn't. But it means that the federal government kind of gives them, the Fish and Wildlife Service gives them, here's the framework within which you have to set your seasons and bag limits. You can be more restrictive, but you can't be more liberal, right? So they work together on that. And the federal government has, a lot of their efforts have been working towards trying to come up each year with what are the limits within which a state has to operate earlier. A lot of frustration that states had in recent decades has been, feds, you're giving us the framework to work within, like at the end of spring, first of summer. Our hunt guides are supposed to be coming out right now. We need that earlier. So they've been working to try to get that to the states earlier so that they have time to come up with what their seasons and bag limits are and get the hunt guide made and out to the public in time. When it comes to small game, this is fundamental. And I think most of you are familiar with the concept of additive and compensatory mortality. But for a couple of you who might not be familiar or as familiar with it, hear me now, pay attention. This is key. A mortality factor, if we think about hunting as a mortality factor, if an individual shoots an animal in the fall that would have died later in the winter anyway, due to some other cause like predation, then we call that mortality factor a compensatory mortality factor. We're compensating for something else that would have killed it anyway. We haven't changed anything, okay? So if we consider that collectively all the hunters maybe shoot 10% of a population every fall in every hunting season, but 10, 20, 30% of that population would die over winter anyway, then hunting is compensatory. We haven't changed the overall mortality, right? If on the other hand, a hunter kills an animal that would have survived later and reproduced and added to the population the next spring, that's an additive mortality factor. And if hunting accounts for 30% of all the dead animals, and if you didn't have hunting, only 20% of the animals would have died, then you've got 10% additive mortality. Hunting has added to the overall mortality, right? So additive mortality, this is percent taken by hunting. As soon as you start hunting, the overall survival rate goes down. And the more you hunt, the more the survival rate goes down. With compensatory, hunting kills animals. The more you hunt, it doesn't change the overall survival rate, except when you get to a point where it does, right? And where is that point? It depends on how R-selected that species is, on how productive they are, on how many offspring they have. But the general guiding principle of small game management has generally been that most small game are R-selected. Therefore, hunting mortality of small game is usually compensatory. Okay. Now, do we know all the times that it's not? No, we don't. So what do we do? And this is one of the most important things I have to say today. The rest is just details. What might we do to kind of check ourselves on whether hunting mortality of small game is still compensatory or whether it might be becoming additive? Is there anything that we can, any data that we can check periodically on an annual basis? What's that?
Hunter harvest data.
That's right, yeah. So we look at hunter harvest data, and that includes not only how many are harvested, but it also includes catch per unit effort, right? How many are harvested per hours attempted, right? And if those numbers start changing from year to year, then we might need to put that under a magnifying glass and start paying more attention, do some studies. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, I just said that. So yeah, we've always just kind of made that assumption that usually it is compensatory, and we can kind of check and pay attention every now and then. Let's take mourning doves as an example, okay? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service divides the United States into 3 hunt units, the Eastern, Central, and Western Hunt Unit for mourning doves, all right? There are a few states that do not allow harvest of mourning doves. Those shaded in gray. Anybody know why?
Breeding areas.
Mm-mm.
Too many people?
Mm-mm.
They're not real parts of the migratory route.
Mm-mm.
Lower overall population.
Mm-mm.
Okay, what is it?
No, keep guessing. This is fun.
They
These
just
are-
don't like the taste.
Nope.
Does that do with politics?
Hmm?
Does that do with politics?
Nope. You might be getting closer though. Not politics, but
People like them. People like them. Like,
why might people like mourning doves?
because the sound of them.
No. This is good. Keep going. We got time.
Because they're pretty to look at.
No.
I'm thinking like, because like movies and stuff like that, they always have like
The
the morning
birds.
dove sound on them.
Mm-hmm.
Research purposes.
My brain.
Do they compete with that?
I'm gonna bet there's no reason.
Well, there's a reason. My daddy always said, don't talk about politics or
Religion.
what about religion? It's the bird of the Bible. And so these states have
Really?
decided to create laws that say we're not going to kill the bird of peace from the Bible.
Which is weird because we're in the Bible Belt.
How about that? But we do like our hunting. Don't mess with our hunting, right? So, this is from 2010, okay? And it might be hard for you to read this, but it's the trends that I want you to look at, okay? In particular, you can ignore the light gray line. These are call count survey data from the Biological Resources Division that they do every year. This is in the Eastern Unit from 1965 through 2010. This is the Eastern Unit. This is the Eastern Unit hunt states. This is the Eastern Unit non-hunt states from 1965 through 2010. The black is the herd, and they put more weight and reliability on the number of calls heard. So, overall down, hunt states down, non-hunt states going up. So could that be an indication that hunting mortality might be additive? That's a real life question. Technically? How about non-technically? What do you mean? What do you mean technically? What do you think? Could it serve as could it be a hint that maybe hunting mortality is additive? It might be, right? Now, these are broad trends. There's other questions. Do the call count surveys reflect the actual population status? Are there other factors responsible for mortality? But in the absence of any other data, what that can tell you is that we might be harvesting over harvesting. We harvest more mourning doves than any other species in North America. We harvest the heck out of them. Okay, so yeah, it's a possibility. So we pay attention to that. The Fish and Wildlife Service pays attention to that. This is from the Fish and Wildlife Service's mourning dove population status report from 2010. The calling count survey herd data provided evidence that abundance of doves decreased in all 3 dove management units, Eastern, Central, and Western, during the long term. Within the Eastern unit, however, there's evidence that abundance decreased in hunt states, but actually increased in non-hunt states. So the only place that abundance was increasing was specifically in the states where they weren't hunted, and that's just a few states, right? That'd be a pretty strong coincidence if it was something else that was responsible for that correlation. So we don't necessarily know that it's causation, but we've got some pretty strong inference. So the service has reason to be concerned. Again, this is going to be impossible for you to read from a distance, but this is estimated mourning dove total annual harvest and harvest rates for hatch year and after hatch year age classes in the Eastern, Central, and Western management units. This is Eastern, Central, and Western. This is from 2002 through 2022, okay? So harvest rates generally are kind of sort of going down a little bit, not too much here, a little bit more there, mixed right there. What we have here is estimates and 95% confidence intervals of mourning dove absolute abundance by management unit and year from 2003 to 2022. Slight downward trend, slight downward trend. Right? Now, we might have correlation here, but does that mean causation? Does this data, is there any reason to think that the numbers might be going down because of hunting based on just what you see here? No, all we have here is correlation. Maybe harvest is going down because the numbers are going down, right? But regardless, it appears that the numbers are kind of going down. All right, east, middle, and west. Maybe not so much in the west, but east and middle, we've got, it looks like a pretty solid trend of downward populations. Why might mourning doves possibly be declining in the east and middle United States? What about habitat?
Climate change.
Okay. All right.
Isn't it due to like storms?
Storms?
Like blowing their nests and stuff out? I've always heard like if a big storm blows in before dove season, then or a bad season just because they didn't hatch out. Or they didn't hatch out.
I've never heard any that expressed, that or climate associated for big storms expressed as a possible reason why long-term trends of dove might be heading down. I don't know. What do you mean by habitat?
City development.
We have
More development?
urbanization, you have, ag production, you have
Fragmentation.
fracking, you have
What kind of habitat do mourning doves like?
early succession.
Early successional habitat? Would you generally think that they might like row crop agriculture?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is row crop agriculture increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
Going up?
It's not clean, it's clean now.
Is it cleaner?
Yeah.
Are are our combines doing a more effective job of harvesting grain? So, you know, it could be just simply cleaner agriculture, you know. We don't know. We don't know. I don't think anybody has the answers to these questions. But we do seem to have some pretty strong inference that the numbers are going down a little. Okay. This is, I'm switching gears now away from mourning doves. There were several reports that came out about 15 years ago from the Fish and Wildlife Service on a lot of their small game species, and not a whole lot since then. But this is from 2010. Their priority information for rails and snipe. They say population sizes and trends in abundance are essentially unknown for snipe and rails at both the flyway level and the national level. And habitat types that are important for rails, such as salt marsh and freshwater emergent marsh. What does emergent marsh mean?
Stuff starting to grow.
Yeah, emergent vegetation is coming up out of the water, okay? So places where they can hide, okay? Have likely declined. Existing habitat quality is likely negatively affected by development and changes in hydrologic regimes. What would be some examples of changes in hydrologic regimes?
Different sets of species coming in.
No.
Channel.
Channelization, yeah, channelization and flood control, yeah. And existing surveys such as the breeding bird survey do not adequately index relevance. Who can tell me what the breeding bird survey is?
Beacon.
Nope. That's the waterfowl surveys, breeding population surveys conducted by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Canadian Wildlife Service for waterfowl. Breeding bird survey is different.
It's for passerine, right?
All birds.
All birds.
All birds.
Is that the one that's all volunteer, or is that the Christmas bird count?
No, that's the Christmas bird count. So I was going to bring that up next. Okay. Guys, there are two big avian surveys that are long-term. They've been going on for a long time. The Christmas bird count is conducted around Christmas time by the Audubon Society by volunteers. So this is, and it's been going on for many decades. These are volunteers that usually really know their stuff. They're probably better ornithologists than a lot of wildlife scientists are. And they go to these predetermined routes year after year after year. So, and this is just nationwide. It's huge, okay? But, you know, it's volunteers and none of them are vetted. So, you know, how reliable is the data? It's probably pretty reliable, but it might not be very consistent. So you might have some routes that don't get done some years, or some volunteers that are new and less experienced some years, right? So it's a huge database that's really valuable, partly because it's big and it's long term. The breeding bird survey is done in the springtime during the breeding season for a lot of species. It's done not by volunteers, it's not citizen science, it's done by the U.S. Geological Survey, Biological Resources Division biologists, okay? And it's been done not quite as long, but for several decades. And these guys, these scientists are authoritative. They really know their stuff. So the breeding bird survey is our main go-to survey for long-term avian population trends for all avian species, supplemented by the Christmas bird count, okay, which is a bigger database, but maybe not quite as high quality. Good? All right, so somebody comment on that. What are some of your thoughts on that? That's a pretty powerful statement. It's got 2 or 3 moving parts to it.
So it's suggesting that habitat quality is also causing the downward trend in population.
Do you think it is suggesting that? Maybe. It's suggesting it might be. It might be. It's the habitat quality is
Likely negatively affected.
Yeah. So, yeah, we've got our habitat is being impacted for sure. What else?
It's just saying like we can't even estimate what their populations might be.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
We know that they're losing habitat, but we don't know what their population numbers are doing at all.
That's right.
Saying the survey isn't adequately.
And what they mean by it doesn't adequately give us enough information is the number of birds that they detect on those surveys is so low, their sample sizes are so small, that the variation is huge.
Is it just talking about just the rails when they say that?
For that particular one, they're saying for the rails, they have more information on snipe. Yeah, they have more data on snipe. Rails are very cryptic though. Yeah. So we've got declining habitat and an inadequate survey process. There's every reason to imagine, to think that these birds might be declining, but we don't know if they are or not. And they are a game species. So this is a vulnerable area, right? And there's a few of these. There's a few of these out there. You know, there's some at the federal level. There's some at the state level. We'll talk about weasels next week. But yeah, that's a pretty strong statement, and it's one that you'd hope anybody who's responsible for these species knows this and would be cringing when they read it. All right, here's another report that came out the same year. Priority information needs for American coots, purple gallinules, and common moorhens. What are common moorhens? What's the other name for a moorhen? Gallinule, common gallinule, yeah. So there's common gallinules and purple gallinules, right? And the common gallinule is the common, also called a moorhen. So it says the best available information on the range-wide population status of coot, gallinule, and moorhen comes from the North American Breeding Bird Survey. Although the survey is poorly designed for monitoring population trends of marsh birds, a lot of them don't get out into the middle of emergent marshes where these birds are, and a lot of them are salt marshes and very isolated places. So although it's not designed well to survey these birds, no other survey currently monitors these species on a continental scale. All three species show insignificant long-term trends and significant declining short-term trends. So we're not sure about long-term, but short-term, we know that they're declining, okay? That was from 97 through 2007, so this is a few years old. Better information on the population status of American coot exists within the traditional survey area covered by the annual Waterfowl Breeding Population and Habitat Survey. Or, you just like saying that, right?
Yeah.
Yep. American coots, gallinules, common moorhens are hunted in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The continental harvest of all three species is low relative to other migratory game birds. A majority of the US harvest for all three species takes place in the states of Louisiana, California, Florida, and Texas. How much of a majority, I don't know. That's where a lot of the habitat is. So this is another example of, they're declining. They don't really talk about habitat loss here, but the habitat loss that was occurring for the others is occurring for these as well. So another area for concern. This is next part of the report. Discussions during 3 online meetings resulted in identification of 4 priority information needs for coots, gallinules, and moorhens, no particular order. 1, we need a monitoring program. Implement a national marsh bird monitoring program. 2, update the National Wetland Inventory. That's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service inventory of where our wetlands are in the United States. And the point they were making was that inventory has been poor. It's been in poor condition. We haven't been able to keep up with all the wetlands that we've drained for agriculture purposes, as well as all the ones that we've restored. So we don't know where the best places are to even look for these birds. And how can we create a monitoring program if we don't even know where to look anymore? So first we got to figure out where the dang habitat is now and how it's changing, and then we got to go look for the birds in that habitat, right? Continue to improve the harvest information program sampling frame. So the way that at the federal level we sample hunters to determine harvest rates works pretty well for ducks and geese that we're harvesting millions of. It does not work well for these species that hardly any get harvested. So our sample sizes are inadequate to know how many we're harvesting. So we need to do a better job of, should we focus, for example, those questionnaires on hunters where they're getting more of them in Florida and California and in Louisiana and Texas, or spend a whole lot more money nationwide and just know that you're hopefully going to get a decent enough sample size, but it's going to cost you a whole lot. That's a tough thing to do. And then determine breeding origin of American coots and common moorhens that are harvested at high harvest locations. Where are those things coming from? We don't know. We don't have a lot of data on this. Not a whole lot of people have studied them very much because they're really, really hard to study. You pay $20,000 and get a graduate student and spend 3 years and they get a sample size of 3 birds. And that's not enough to say anything with significance. So it's really expensive to study something that rare. Does that make sense? But yet, it's still game. Should it be? We don't have any reason to say that it shouldn't be. Nobody has petitioned it for listing as threatened or endangered. Should that be the trigger that makes us decide when to take it off the game species list? Yeah.
They have like disinformation or lack of, and they still have these classified as game species, but they have all the information against cormorants and their protected species. I think we should be able to shoot cormorants left and right. And seagulls for all I care.
Fair question. Yeah. Right. Why do you think? There's an answer to that. Let me give you an analogy. There are no red wolves or elk at LBL, but there are fishers on Catoosa and alligator snapping turtles in the Hatchie.
Allegedly. Allegedly.
There are. So there's an analogy there. Based on what I said, why would cormorants be protected and black vultures be protected? I'm not sure if this is a good analogy or not.
Yeah,
I'll just say it. Okay. Because there's a whole lot of them and they cause damage and people are paying a lot of attention and they want to shoot a whole lot of them. And there's a lot of attention focused on them, partly because they do damage. And these cryptic birds, nobody's paying any attention to them. I mean, there's hardly any of them out there. Hardly any of them are being harvested. Their harvest numbers are very low. So I think probably the attitude of a lot of biologists is let that sleeping dog lie, as long as nobody's complaining, as long as nobody's saying you should put it on the endangered species list. Let's just see if we can figure out a better way to monitor them and hope that nobody calls our hand. Does that make sense? So out of that recommendation in 2010 came the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Protocol Framework for the Inventory and Monitoring of Secretive Marsh Birds. So they've got a protocol set up now for monitoring. And where's this monitoring gonna happen? On the National Wildlife Refuges largely. They can give that to states, and states can do it on the WMAs if they want. They could even maybe walk it out to private lands if they wanted to, right? How's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service been funded lately? Poorly. So do they have funding to do these surveys or the manpower to do these surveys? A lot of the time they don't. So at least they have a protocol in place, but if Congress doesn't release the funds to fill the jobs, then the data is not being gathered. And to a large degree it's not. We have marginal data. This is old data, but this is breeding bird survey population trends across the United States on American coots. And what that y-axis is average number counted per root, okay? But what's significant is just the direction of the trend. How does it look like coots have done from the mid-60s to the 2000s?
Pretty well.
Doing good, right? Any surprises there? They're a generalist, right? It's from the 1980s especially, we've restored a lot of wetlands. They might not be high quality wetlands, but coots don't care. Just give us some water, please, and these water chickens are going to do just fine. So coots are doing great. Any surprises there? Coot harvest history, 1950s to the 2000s. A lot of variation. I don't know what that's about. I don't know why it went down so much in the late 50s, but generally through the 1980s to today, where most people just don't shoot coots, right? Most people don't think that they're edible or a sport bird worth pursuing whatsoever. So, any real concerns about coot harvest? Not really. They're doing pretty well. Most people don't really care for them that much, so they're probably going to be fine. Common moorhen. How does that look?
Slight decline.
Very slight decline, right? Not much. Pretty flat. Is it likely that hunting mortality is additive on this species? Probably not. They're very rare. Very few hunters pursue them. The number that those hunters get is very low, and that's probably going to be where the numbers are really high anyway. So in most places, like in Tennessee, where they're really low, there's probably none being harvested, practically, right? What should our concern be with regard to this species? Habitat, right? Wetlands, and generally, what's going to be good for a lot of birds, waterfowl, is going to be good for these guys too, especially where there's emergent wetlands. Yeah.
Do they actually get significant data from pre-licensed surveys? Like Tennessee, whenever you can buy your license, they give you those surveys. Like, did you hunt gallinules and rails and stuff? Is that actually?
They get data, but the numbers are just so low. Like maybe less than 1% say yeah they do, and that might be 3 or 4, 5, 6 hunters in a state. And did you get any? No, I didn't get any. Every few years somebody gets 1 or 2. That's just such low sample sizes that it doesn't have any reliability. There's just this huge variation. Yeah. There's nationwide moorhen harvest history. It really has gone up at times back in the 70s and 80s nationwide. A lot of this would have been down like in Florida and such. Over 60,000. But more recently, we're talking more like 3,000 to 5,000 birds nationwide, right? And most of that harvest, remember, is going to be like in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, California, where you have a lot of that optimal habitat for them. So very little here. That's the Sora rail. How does it look?
Steady.
A lot like the gallinule, very similar situation to the gallinule. Yeah. So if you guys were a team of game biologists for TWRA and you were supposed to come up with what should we do about our cryptic birds, our gallinules and rails and such that are game species, what would your priorities be here in Tennessee?
Sounds like getting data.
Getting data on what?
Maybe set up an incentive for bird watchers to submit something.
So getting data on abundance for one thing. Getting data also on what else?
Where they live, where they are.
Nesting.
Where they are, so where the habitat is, right? How much which of that habitat are they using? Where are they nesting? Such. Okay, all right.
What's affecting them?
What are they? What is impacting them? Yeah, maybe do some studies, but that's expensive and hard. Yeah, as well as harvest levels. See if we can drill down a little bit deeper and get more accurate data on what the harvest levels are. You can figure probably as long as those numbers stay pretty low, that harvest is probably in Tennessee going to remain compensatory, unless for some reason hunters have an incentive to start really going after them, right? But that is an assumption that the survival and welfare of that species in Tennessee depends on that assumption being accurate. So, what's the best thing that we could do for those species in the state? Provide more habitat. How do you provide more emergent wetland habitat?
Figure that out yet.
No, we know how. It's just expensive.
Yeah.
How do we do it? 2 ways.
Is that program where we get people to quit row cropping and move their?
We can incentivize private land through wetland reserve program and such. That's one way. And what's the other way?
Reestablish what was already messed up.
We do what?
Reestablish what was already messed up.
Okay. And that can be through that program, incentive program on private land. Or the other way, we buy it. we buy it to protect it, right? And fix it on our own land. Those are essentially the 2 ways that you increase wetland habitat, because wetland habitat is great for ecosystem services, but it's not great for development and it's not great for agriculture, right? So there's no financial incentive to protect it. So if we want to ensure the continuity of those species, we just need to be sure that we have enough habitat. Yeah. So we just need more data. We need more information. Yeah. And then once we get that data and information, there might need to be more habitat acquisition and restoration that goes on. Or we live with low levels. I think squirrels are doing fine. Rabbits are doing fine. Yeah. When's the squirrel hunting season?
Now,
Now? Okay. When did it start?
when bow season opened.
Yeah, late August. Yeah. And when does it close?
March.
February, March? Yeah, it's lengthened all the way to March now. And is that it? Is there a spring season now? There is. There is a spring season. Yeah. Typically, we pay attention to the time of year that animals breed, and we don't mess with them. We try not to mess with them, during that time when they're breeding, or at least when they're raising their young, right? How many times a year do squirrels breed?
So,
Twice a year. Once in the winter, December, January or so, and then once in the summer, around May, June, right? So we have hunting seasons primarily before they're raising their young, those 2 times per year. TWRA opened that spring hunting season, I don't know, a couple decades ago, because it was apparent that hunting was just absolutely compensatory, not having any impact whatsoever, and it provided hunting during a time of year that hunting was not available for other species. So if we want to let folks hunt in May, what's one of the most safe species that we could probably let them go after? Tree rats. Yeah, okay. Open it up and let's see what happens, and it's been fine. That's all I got.